The morning fog hung thick over Windsor Castle as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his uniform for what he thought would be another ordinary day. As a royal guard with 15 years of service, Thomas had seen many changes within the palace walls. The passing of Queen Elizabeth II had left everyone feeling lost, like sailors without their North Star. Now, with King Charles III on the throne and Queen Camilla settling into her new role, the castle felt different somehow. Thomas walked through the corridors he knew by heart, his polished boots clicking against the marble floors. The portraits of past monarchs watched him from their gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to follow his every step. He had always felt a deep connection to this place and to the royal family he served. His father had been a guard before him, and his grandfather before that. The Mitchell family had protected the crown for 3 generations. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Thomas received his assignments from Captain Reynolds, a stern man with gray hair and sharp blue eyes who had served the royal family for over 20 years. The captain handed him a clipboard with his duties for the day. "Mitchell, you're assigned to the Queen's wing today," Captain Reynolds said without looking up from his paperwork. "Her Majesty Queen Camilla will be attending a charity event in London this afternoon. Security sweep of her private quarters is needed while she's away." Thomas nodded and took the clipboard. Security sweeps were routine, especially when members of the royal family were away from the castle. It was a precautionary measure that had been in place for decades. He had done hundreds of these sweeps before, checking for anything unusual, ensuring all windows and doors were secure, and making sure no unauthorized personnel had accessed the areas. As Thomas made his way to Queen Camilla's wing of the castle, he couldn't help but think about how much things had changed since Queen Elizabeth's passing. The late Queen had been like a grandmother to him, even though they had rarely spoken directly. She had a way of making everyone in the castle feel like they were part of something greater than themselves. Her presence had been comforting, steady, and unchanging in a world that seemed to move faster every day. Queen Camilla was different. Not better or worse, just different. She was warmer in some ways, more approachable perhaps, but there was still an adjustment period for everyone in the castle. The staff was learning her preferences, her routines, and her way of doing things. Change was never easy, especially in a place where tradition was everything. Thomas reached the Queen's private quarters and began his security sweep. The rooms were elegant and tastefully decorated, with a mix of antique furniture and modern touches that reflected Queen Camilla's personal style. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, and natural light streamed through the tall windows, casting beautiful patterns on the carpet. He methodically checked each room, testing window locks, examining corners for anything out of place, and ensuring all was secure. The sitting room, the study, the bathroom, everything appeared normal. As he approached the wardrobe room, Thomas noticed something peculiar. The heavy wooden door, which was usually kept locked when the Queen was away, was slightly ajar. Thomas paused, his training kicking in. This wasn't normal. The Queen's wardrobe room contained her most valuable clothing and accessories, including pieces that were worth more than most people's houses. It should have been securely locked. His hand instinctively moved to the radio on his belt, ready to call for backup if needed. He approached the door carefully, listening for any sounds from within. The castle was quiet except for the distant hum of activity from other parts of the building. Thomas pushed the door open slowly, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of intrusion. The wardrobe room was magnificent. Rows upon rows of elegant dresses, coats, and formal wear hung neatly on custom-made hangers. Shoes were displayed on specially designed shelves, and jewelry cases lined one wall. Everything appeared to be in order, but Thomas knew something wasn't right. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. As he stepped further into the room, Thomas noticed that one of the wardrobes at the far end seemed different. The door was slightly open, and there appeared to be something on the floor beside it. He moved closer, his heart beginning to beat faster. Years of training had prepared him for many situations, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. The wardrobe in question was older than the others, made of dark wood with intricate carvings along its edges. It looked like it had been in the castle for many years, perhaps predating Queen Camilla's arrival. As Thomas approached, he could see that the lock appeared to have been forced. Not violently, but carefully, as if someone had used a key or picked it with skill. Inside the wardrobe, Thomas found something that made his blood run cold. Hidden behind Queen Camilla's evening gowns, wrapped carefully in what appeared to be museum-quality preservation cloth, was a garment he had never seen before. It was clearly very old and very special. The fabric seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of the wardrobe room, and there was an aura of importance about it that Thomas couldn't explain. His hands trembling slightly, Thomas carefully moved aside the other garments to get a better look. The mysterious piece of clothing appeared to be a ceremonial robe or dress of some kind. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with hand-sewn details that spoke of royal significance. But what made Thomas's heart race was a small, handwritten tag attached to the preservation cloth. In elegant handwriting that Thomas recognized from official documents he had seen over the years, the tag read, "Personal garment of H.M. Queen Elizabeth II, sacred to her memory, not to be disturbed." Thomas stood frozen, staring at the tag. This was clearly something that belonged to the late Queen, something that had been hidden away, something that perhaps Queen Camilla didn't even know existed in her wardrobe room. But why was it hidden? And, more importantly, who had been trying to access it? The implications of his discovery began to dawn on Thomas. If someone had been trying to steal this garment, they weren't just committing theft, they were violating the memory of Queen Elizabeth II herself. The late Queen had been beloved by the nation and the world. Any attempt to profit from her personal belongings would be seen as the ultimate betrayal. Thomas carefully stepped back from the wardrobe, his mind racing. He needed to report this immediately, but he also needed to be careful. If word got out that someone had been trying to steal Queen Elizabeth's personal belongings, it would be a scandal that could rock the royal family. The press would have a field day, and the public's trust in the security of the royal household could be severely damaged. But there was something else troubling Thomas. How did this garment end up in Queen Camilla's wardrobe room? Had it been moved there deliberately? Was it being hidden from someone, or was someone trying to hide it? The questions multiplied in his mind as he tried to piece together what had happened. Thomas looked around the wardrobe room once more, searching for any other clues. That's when he noticed something else that seemed out of place. On a small table near the window, there was what appeared to be a letter, partially hidden under some jewelry catalogs. Thomas approached carefully and saw that it was written on official royal household stationery. Without touching the letter, Thomas leaned down to read what he could see. The visible portion mentioned transfer of personal effects and accordance with Her late Majesty's wishes. It was signed, but the signature was partially obscured by the catalogs on top of it. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This discovery was becoming more complex by the minute. It wasn't just about a forced wardrobe lock or a hidden garment. There seemed to be an entire story here, one that involved the transfer of Queen Elizabeth's personal belongings and possibly some kind of disagreement or secret about how her effects should be handled. As Thomas stood in the wardrobe room, surrounded by the luxury and grandeur of royal life, he realized that he had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple security breach. This was about loyalty, memory, and perhaps even betrayal within the royal household itself. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. As a royal guard, Thomas had sworn an oath to protect the royal family and their interests. But what happened when those interests seemed to conflict? What happened when protecting one member of the royal family might mean exposing secrets about another? Thomas knew he had to make a decision. He could simply report the forced lock and recommend increased security, keeping the details of what he found to himself. Or he could report everything and let the consequences fall where they may. Either choice could have far-reaching implications for his career, for the royal family, and for the memory of Queen Elizabeth II. As he stood there in the elegant wardrobe room, with its rows of beautiful clothes and its hidden secrets, Thomas Mitchell realized that his ordinary Tuesday morning had just become the most important moment of his career. The discovery he had made would change everything, not just for him, but potentially for the entire royal household. The fog outside the castle windows was beginning to lift, but inside the wardrobe room, Thomas felt like he was stepping deeper into a mystery that would test everything he believed about duty, loyalty, and truth. The garment hanging before him wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a symbol of everything Queen Elizabeth II had represented, and someone had tried to take it away. Thomas took a deep breath, knowing that whatever decision he made in the next few moments would echo through the halls of Windsor Castle for years to come. The legacy of Queen Elizabeth II hung in the balance, wrapped in preservation cloth and hidden in a wardrobe that held more secrets than he could have ever imagined. Thomas Mitchell's hands shook slightly as he reached for his secure radio. The discovery in Queen Camilla's wardrobe room had shaken him to his core, but his years of training told him that protocol must be followed. He needed to contact Captain Reynolds immediately, but he also needed to secure the scene first. Moving carefully around the wardrobe room, Thomas made mental notes of everything he could see without disturbing the evidence. The forced lock on the antique wardrobe, the partially hidden letter on the side table, and, most importantly, the sacred garment that belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Each detail could be crucial in understanding what had happened here. As Thomas prepared to make his call, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. His heart raced as he quickly moved away from the wardrobe and toward the door. The footsteps were getting closer, and Thomas realized he needed to act quickly. If someone was coming to check on the wardrobe room, they might be connected to whatever had happened here. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and Thomas heard the soft sound of someone trying the door handle. Whoever was out there was being very quiet, very careful. This wasn't the normal sound of castle staff going about their duties. This was someone who didn't want to be heard. Thomas positioned himself behind the door, ready to confront whoever was trying to enter. His years of security training had prepared him for situations like this, but his heart was still pounding. The handle turned slowly, and the door began to open. To Thomas's surprise, the person who entered was not a stranger or an intruder. It was Lady Margaret Ashford, one of Queen Camilla's senior ladies-in-waiting. Lady Margaret was in her early 60s, with silver hair always perfectly styled and a demeanor that spoke of decades spent in royal service. She was known throughout the castle as someone who was fiercely loyal and absolutely trustworthy. Lady Margaret gasped when she saw Thomas standing in the wardrobe room. Her usually composed face showed surprise and what Thomas thought might be fear. "Thomas," she said, trying to regain her composure. "I wasn't expecting anyone to be here. I was just checking on some arrangements for Her Majesty's upcoming engagements." But Thomas noticed that Lady Margaret's eyes immediately went to the antique wardrobe where he had made his discovery. Her reaction told him that she knew about the hidden garment. The question was whether she was involved in trying to protect it or in trying to take it. "Lady Margaret," Thomas said respectfully but firmly. "I'm conducting a security sweep as ordered by Captain Reynolds. I've discovered some irregularities that need to be reported immediately." Lady Margaret's face went pale. She glanced again at the wardrobe, then back at Thomas. For a moment, she seemed to be struggling with some internal decision. Finally, she walked over to one of the chairs in the wardrobe room and sat down heavily. "Thomas," she said quietly, "what I'm about to tell you must remain strictly between us until we can determine the proper course of action. The situation you've discovered is far more complicated than it appears." Thomas remained standing, his training telling him to be cautious. Lady Margaret had always been kind to him, but his discovery had shown him that the royal household held secrets he had never imagined. 3 weeks ago, Lady Margaret continued, "I received a private request from someone claiming to represent certain members of Queen Elizabeth II extended family. They said that Her late Majesty had expressed wishes about specific personal items that were to be passed down to particular relatives, not included in the official estate." Thomas listened carefully as Lady Margaret explained. According to her, this person had produced what appeared to be official documentation, complete with what looked like Queen Elizabeth's personal seal. The documents requested the discreet transfer of certain personal items, including the ceremonial garment that Thomas had discovered. "I was suspicious from the beginning," Lady Margaret admitted. "The request came through unusual channels, and something about it felt wrong. But the documentation looked authentic, and I felt I had to investigate." Lady Margaret explained that she had quietly moved the garment to the wardrobe room for safekeeping while she tried to verify the authenticity of the request. She had been conducting her own investigation, trying to contact officials who would have been involved in the proper handling of Queen Elizabeth's estate. "That's why the lock was forced," she said. "I had to access a wardrobe that had been sealed since Queen Camilla took residence here. The garment had been stored there since the transition, and I needed to examine it to understand what we were dealing with. Thomas began to understand the complexity of the situation. Lady Margaret wasn't trying to steal Queen Elizabeth's garment, she was trying to protect it from people who might be attempting to fraudulently claim it. "Lady Margaret," Thomas said carefully, "have you been able to verify whether the request was legitimate?" Lady Margaret shook her head sadly. "That's the problem, Thomas. The more I investigated, the more suspicious I became. The people making the request have been very pushy, very insistent. They've contacted me multiple times, and yesterday they even suggested that they might take other measures if their request wasn't honored soon." Thomas felt a chill. The situation was becoming more serious than he had initially thought. Someone was actively trying to acquire Queen Elizabeth's personal belongings through potentially fraudulent means, and they were becoming aggressive about it. "There's something else," Lady Margaret continued. "Yesterday evening, I noticed that someone had been in the wardrobe room. Small things were moved, and I suspected that someone might have been trying to access the garment while I was away. That's why I came here this morning, to check on its security." Thomas realized that Lady Margaret's arrival hadn't been a coincidence. She had been monitoring the situation, trying to protect Queen Elizabeth's belongings while also investigating the suspicious request. But her methods had put her in a difficult position. "Lady Margaret, we need to contact Captain Reynolds immediately," Thomas said. "This situation is beyond what either of us can handle alone. If people are trying to fraudulently claim Queen Elizabeth's personal effects, this is a matter for palace security and, possibly, the authorities." Lady Margaret nodded, but Thomas could see the worry in her eyes. "Thomas, you must understand that this situation could cause enormous embarrassment for the royal family if it's not handled carefully. If word gets out that people are trying to steal Queen Elizabeth's belongings, or if it appears that the palace doesn't have proper security for her effects, it could be devastating." Thomas understood her concern, but he also knew that hiding the situation wasn't the answer. "With respect, Lady Margaret, the longer we wait to report this, the worse it could become. If these people are becoming aggressive, they might try other methods to get what they want." As if to underscore his point, Thomas's radio crackled to life. Captain Reynolds' voice came through clearly. "All units, be advised we have reports of unauthorized personnel attempting to access restricted areas of the castle. Increase vigilance and report any suspicious activity immediately." Thomas and Lady Margaret looked at each other with growing alarm. The people trying to claim Queen Elizabeth's garment might already be attempting to access other areas of the castle. "Lady Margaret," Thomas said urgently, "we need to secure this garment immediately and get it to a safe location. Then, we need to report everything we know." Lady Margaret stood up, her years of royal service giving her the strength to face the situation head-on. "You're right, Thomas. I've been trying to handle this discreetly, but discretion isn't possible when we're dealing with people who might resort to breaking into the castle." Together, they carefully examined the garment and the letter Thomas had noticed. The letter was indeed about the transfer of personal effects, but, as Lady Margaret explained, it was a forgery, a very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. The real tragedy was that someone was willing to go to such lengths to profit from Queen Elizabeth's memory. As they prepared to contact Captain Reynolds, Lady Margaret shared one more disturbing piece of information. "Thomas, I believe I know who's behind this. Yesterday, I received a call from someone claiming to work for a private auction house. They said they had heard that certain items from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection might become available for sale. They were offering substantial sums of money." The implication was clear. Someone wasn't just trying to steal Queen Elizabeth's belongings for sentimental reasons, they were planning to sell them for profit. The sacred garment that had been worn by the beloved monarch was being treated as nothing more than a valuable commodity. Thomas felt a surge of anger. Queen Elizabeth II had been more than just a monarch, she had been a symbol of dignity, service, and tradition. The idea that someone would try to profit from her personal belongings was deeply offensive to him and to everyone who had served her with loyalty and respect. "We're going to stop this," Thomas said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we're going to protect Queen Elizabeth's memory and make sure these people don't succeed." Lady Margaret smiled for the first time since entering the wardrobe room. Thank you, Thomas. I've been carrying this burden alone for too long. It's time we handled this the right way. As they prepared to secure the garment and contact their superiors, both Thomas and Lady Margaret knew that they were about to set in motion a series of events that would test the security of the royal household and the integrity of everyone involved. The discovery in Queen Camilla's wardrobe room was just the beginning of a much larger story about loyalty, greed, and the lengths some people would go to profit from tragedy. Within minutes of Thomas's radio call, Captain Reynolds arrived at Queen Camilla's wardrobe room with 2 additional security officers. His usually stern expression grew even more serious as Thomas and Lady Margaret explained their discoveries. The captain listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. "Show me everything," Captain Reynolds said after hearing their initial report. Every detail could be important. Thomas carefully led Captain Reynolds to the antique wardrobe, explaining how he had found the lock forced and the sacred garment hidden behind Queen Camilla's evening wear. Lady Margaret provided additional context about the suspicious requests she had received and her own investigation into their authenticity. Captain Reynolds examined the forced lock with the eye of someone who had seen many security breaches over the years. This was done by someone with skill, he observed. Not a random break-in. Whoever did this knew what they were looking for and where to find it. As the security team documented the scene, Captain Reynolds made several secure phone calls. Thomas could only hear portions of the conversations, but he gathered that the captain was alerting higher authorities within the royal household and possibly outside agencies as well. "Thomas, Lady Margaret," Captain Reynolds said after finishing his calls, "this situation is now classified as a security matter of the highest importance. You are both to remain available for questioning, and everything you have seen and heard today is strictly confidential." Just then, one of the security officers monitoring the castle's communication systems approached Captain Reynolds with an urgent message. "Captain, we've intercepted several phone calls to the main castle number in the past hour. Someone has been asking detailed questions about Queen Camilla's schedule and when specific areas of the castle would be unmonitored." The implications were chilling. The people behind the fraudulent documentation weren't just passively waiting for their request to be honored. They were actively gathering intelligence about castle security and royal schedules, possibly planning a more direct approach to acquiring Queen Elizabeth's belongings. Captain Reynolds immediately ordered a complete security lockdown of the castle. All entrances were to be monitored more closely, and additional guards were positioned throughout the building. Queen Camilla, who was still in London for her charity event, was notified that her return to the castle would be delayed for security reasons. As the security measures were being implemented, Thomas found himself thinking about the deeper implications of what was happening. The discovery of Queen Elizabeth's sacred garment in Queen Camilla's wardrobe room raised questions that went beyond the immediate security threat. How had the garment ended up there? Was it part of a larger collection of the late Queen's belongings that had been stored throughout the castle? And, most importantly, who else might know about these hidden treasures? Lady Margaret, who had been quiet since the arrival of Captain Reynolds, finally spoke up. "Captain, there's something else I need to tell you. The garment Thomas discovered isn't the only item that was mentioned in the fraudulent request." Captain Reynolds turned his full attention to Lady Margaret. "Go on." "The documentation I received listed several items that were supposedly being transferred according to Queen Elizabeth's wishes. The ceremonial garment was just one of them. There were also mentions of personal jewelry, handwritten letters, and what was described as a private collection of photographs." Thomas felt his stomach drop. If the garment in the wardrobe room was just one piece of a larger collection, then the security breach was far more extensive than anyone had realized. Somewhere else in the castle, there might be other hidden treasures from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection, and other people might be trying to access them. "Lady Margaret," Captain Reynolds said carefully, "do you have any idea where these other items might be located?" Lady Margaret shook her head. The documentation was deliberately vague about locations. It only mentioned that the items were being held in secure storage within the royal residence pending the completion of the transfer. Captain Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the magnitude of what he was dealing with. Finally, he made another secure phone call, this time speaking in low tones that Thomas couldn't overhear. When he finished, he turned back to Thomas and Lady Margaret. "I've just spoken with Sir James Whitmore, the head of the royal household. He's on his way here immediately. This situation now involves not just castle security, but the proper management of Queen Elizabeth's estate and the integrity of the royal household itself." Thomas had heard of Sir James Whitmore but had never met him personally. The head of the royal household was one of the most senior officials in the entire royal organization, responsible for overseeing all aspects of royal life from ceremonies to finances to personnel management. His involvement indicated that the situation had escalated to the very highest levels of royal administration. While they waited for Sir James to arrive, Captain Reynolds continued his investigation. He had his team examine every inch of the wardrobe room, looking for fingerprints, additional evidence of forced entry, or any other clues about who might have been accessing the area. Thomas found himself reflecting on his years of service to the royal family. He had always taken pride in his role as a protector of the crown, but today's events had shown him that protection involved more than just physical security. It also meant protecting the memory and legacy of those who had served the nation with distinction. Queen Elizabeth II had been more than just a monarch to people like Thomas. She had been a symbol of continuity and stability in an ever-changing world. The idea that someone would try to profit from her personal belongings felt like a violation of everything she had represented. About an hour after Captain Reynolds' call, Sir James Whitmore arrived at the castle with a small team of officials from various departments within the royal household. Sir James was a distinguished man in his late 50s, with grey hair and the kind of bearing that came from years of managing the complex world of royal affairs. After being briefed on the situation by Captain Reynolds, Sir James asked to speak privately with Thomas and Lady Margaret. They were escorted to a secure conference room where Sir James could ask detailed questions without the risk of being overheard. "Thomas, Lady Margaret," Sir James began, "what you have discovered today has the potential to cause significant embarrassment to the royal family if it's not handled properly. But, more importantly, it represents a serious threat to the security and dignity of Queen Elizabeth's legacy." Sir James explained that the royal household had been dealing with increased interest in Queen Elizabeth's personal effects since her passing. There had been numerous legitimate requests from museums, charities, and family members, but there had also been several suspicious inquiries that had raised red flags. "We've been aware that certain individuals might try to take advantage of the transition period to make fraudulent claims on royal property," Sir James continued. "What we didn't realize was that they had advanced far enough to actually attempt to access restricted areas of the castle." Lady Margaret spoke up. "Sir James, I want to apologize for not reporting this situation sooner. I was trying to handle it discreetly to avoid any potential embarrassment, but I realize now that my discretion may have put other items at risk." Sir James was understanding but firm. "Lady Margaret, your intentions were good, but in matters involving royal security and estate management, there can be no individual initiatives. Everything must go through proper channels." Thomas listened as Sir James outlined the steps that would now be taken to address the situation. First, there would be a complete inventory of all items throughout the castle that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. This would help identify if anything was missing and ensure that all such items were properly secured. Second, the investigation into the fraudulent requests would be turned over to specialized authorities who dealt with crimes against the crown. This wasn't just a matter of attempted theft, it was a crime against the monarchy itself. Finally, security protocols throughout the castle would be reviewed and strengthened to prevent any future attempts to access restricted areas or royal property. As Sir James spoke, Thomas realized that his discovery that morning had uncovered something much larger than a simple break-in. It had revealed a sophisticated attempt to exploit the royal household during a period of transition, and it had exposed vulnerabilities in the castle's security that needed to be addressed immediately. "There's one more thing," Sir James said as the meeting continued. "We need to determine how the individuals behind this scheme learned about the existence and location of Queen Elizabeth's personal items. Someone with inside knowledge of the royal household may have provided information to these criminals." The implication hung heavy in the air. There might be someone within the castle walls, someone trusted with access to sensitive information, who was working with the people trying to steal Queen Elizabeth's belongings. The thought that there could be a traitor among the royal staff was almost too painful for Thomas to consider. As the day wore on, Thomas found himself at the center of an investigation that was growing more complex by the hour. What had started as a routine security sweep had become a race to protect not just valuable objects, but the very memory and dignity of Queen Elizabeth II herself. 2 days after Thomas's discovery, the investigation had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. The castle was buzzing with activity as teams of investigators, security specialists, and royal household officials worked around the clock to uncover the full extent of the plot against Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Thomas found himself assigned to a special security detail that was conducting the comprehensive inventory that Sir James had ordered. Room by room, they were examining every area of the castle where the late Queen's belongings might have been stored during the transition to the new reign. The task was enormous. Queen Elizabeth II had lived at Windsor Castle for decades, and her personal belongings were spread throughout numerous rooms, storage areas, and private quarters. Each item had to be catalogued, verified, and secured. The process was revealing just how much of the beloved Queen's personal history was woven into the very fabric of the castle. On Thursday morning, Thomas was assigned to work with Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in royal archives who had been brought in to help identify and catalog historical items. Dr. Chen was a petite woman with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of royal history and protocol. Thomas, Dr. Chen said as they began their work in a storage room adjacent to the Queen's former private study, "What you discovered has helped us understand something that's been puzzling historians for months." She explained that since Queen Elizabeth's passing, several items from her personal collection had been mentioned in various documents and letters, but their actual locations had remained unknown. The royal household had assumed that these items were safely stored in the official archives, but the discovery in Queen Camilla's wardrobe room suggested that there might be a more complex story. It appears that Queen Elizabeth herself may have arranged for certain personal items to be kept separate from the official estate, Dr. Chen continued. These would have been things that held special personal meaning to her, items that she wanted handled with particular care. As they worked through boxes and storage containers, Thomas began to understand the emotional weight of what they were dealing with. These weren't just valuable objects, they were the personal memories of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving her country and the Commonwealth. They found photo albums filled with family pictures, including many candid shots that had never been seen by the public. There were handwritten letters from world leaders, thank you notes from children, and personal correspondence that revealed Queen Elizabeth's warmth, humor, and genuine care for the people she served. In one particularly moving discovery, Thomas found a small wooden box containing what appeared to be handmade gifts from children around the world. There were drawings, small crafts, and letters written in childish handwriting expressing love and admiration for the Queen. Each item had been carefully preserved, showing how much these simple gifts had meant to her. "This is what they were really trying to steal," Dr. Chen said softly as they examined the contents of the wooden box. Not just valuable objects, but the tangible evidence of Queen Elizabeth's connection to her people. As their inventory work continued, Thomas received an urgent message from Captain Reynolds. The investigation into the fraudulent requests had made a breakthrough, and Thomas was needed immediately for a briefing. Thomas found Captain Reynolds in the castle's secure communications center, surrounded by monitors, documents, and several people he didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense, and Thomas could tell that something significant had happened. "Thomas," Captain Reynolds said without preamble, "we've identified the source of the leaked information about Queen Elizabeth's belongings." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. The possibility that someone within the royal household was involved in the scheme had been haunting everyone involved in the investigation. The person responsible is Marcus Webb, one of the assistant archivists who worked on cataloging items during the transition period, Captain Reynolds continued. He had legitimate access to information about the location and nature of Queen Elizabeth's personal effects. Thomas knew Marcus Webb by sight, though they had never worked closely together. Webb was a quiet man in his early 30s who had worked for the royal household for about 5 years. Thomas had always thought of him as competent and trustworthy, which made the betrayal even more shocking. "We have evidence that Webb has been receiving substantial payments from a group of individuals who were planning to acquire Queen Elizabeth's belongings through fraudulent means," one of the investigators explained. The plan was to use the forged documentation that Lady Margaret received, but, if that didn't work, they were prepared to simply take what they wanted. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Webb had provided detailed information about castle security, the locations of valuable items, and the schedules of key personnel. The group he was working with had been planning a sophisticated operation that could have resulted in the theft of irreplaceable pieces of royal history. "Where is Webb now?" Thomas asked. "He's been arrested and is being questioned by authorities," Captain Reynolds replied. "But we believe there may be others within the organization who were involved or who may have been compromised." The revelation that there had been a traitor among the castle staff was devastating for morale. The royal household had always operated on the principle that everyone could be trusted completely. The idea that someone could betray that trust for money was almost incomprehensible to people like Thomas, who had dedicated their lives to royal service. Captain Reynolds continued the briefing, explaining that the investigation had also revealed the identities of the people Webb had been working with. They were part of a larger criminal organization that specialized in acquiring and selling high-value historical artifacts. Queen Elizabeth's belongings represented a particularly valuable target because of their emotional significance to collectors around the world. "The good news," Captain Reynolds said, "is that we've prevented them from acquiring anything of value. Thanks to Thomas's discovery and Lady Margaret's diligence, we were able to secure Queen Elizabeth's belongings before any theft could occur." But Thomas knew that the damage went beyond what had or hadn't been stolen. The fact that such a scheme had been possible at all represented a failure of the security systems that were supposed to protect the royal family and their legacy. As the briefing continued, Thomas learned that the investigation was far from over. Authorities were working to identify other potential targets and to ensure that similar schemes couldn't be attempted in the future. The royal household was also conducting its own internal review to identify any additional security vulnerabilities. That evening, after a long day of inventory work and investigation briefings, Thomas found himself alone in the castle's chapel. It was a place